It's great to be back. It's great to be home, almost. John and Ange have been great supporters of mine for the last few years with the books, and I can't tell you how much I really appreciate that personally. One of the things I always hoped when my first book got published, Far Horizon, back in 2004, was that somehow something like this might happen, that I might be able to assist or help in some way to try and give something back to a continent that my wife Nicola and I have been travelling to since 1995. We first went as tourists, and then, like a lot of people in this room, we got bitten or we breathed something or we drank something or whatever, but we got the bug. And we've been back every year since 1995, and as John mentioned, Nicola and I spend 6 months of every year in Africa and 6 months in Australia, and that's where I write my books. And as well as you know, making it my living to write about Africa, that I might be able to help out in some small way. I haven't helped out, but several people here have helped out. I feel like I'm surrounded by ghosts of my past, by characters from my novels, because we've got a clergyman spy over there, we've got a helicopter pilot, in fact we've got 2 helicopter pilots in the room, I think both females. We've got a Nicholas Duncan, we've got a Nicholas from the chairman of the Safe Foundation, quite poetically is a rhino researcher in my new book, African Dawn, and his name was paid for by somebody else. As John mentioned, we are going to auction off a name or 2 later on. So the good news, Nicholas, you're a rhino researcher. Bad news, you're a Kiwi, I'm afraid. Not that there's anything wrong with Kiwis, I must say. But it's been a really popular way of giving something back by auctioning off names for PDC and for SAVE's New South Wales chapter. I was being interviewed by a female journalist in South Africa earlier in the year when my last book, The Delta, came out. And The Delta features Sid Chipchase. And this journo rather unnervingly had read the book, because when I've been interviewed by journalists in Australia, they've rarely read the book, and they're great interviews, they're really easy. But when someone's actually read the book, it's a bit harder. And this journalist said to me, who's Sue Chipchase? And I said, well, Sue is Sid's wife, the guy in the book. And she says, yeah, I wonder about that because I've just seen her in a Bryce Courtney book. And I said, well, Sue obviously got first prize and Sid got second prize. But I really do appreciate the fact that people have seized on this and used it as a way to raise money. I'd like to thank you all for coming here tonight, and as well as the people that I've met before and I've seen for the last few years. It's fantastic. There's a couple of my other readers here, Kelly and Audrey, who've come along, so I'm actually giving you a few more people as well too, which I'm really happy about. The new book, African Dawn, is all set in Zimbabwe, formerly known as Rhodesia, and it traces the tumultuous, quite tragic recent history of that country from 1959 through to the present. It takes in the Bush War, also known as the War of Liberation, which ended with Robert Mugabe taking power in Zimbabwe in 1980, and then looks at the period since then, when he went from being a darling of the West and the hero of the local people to a man who's presided over the downfall of his own country, which for no other reason, it seems to me, that for the purpose of lining his own pockets. I don't want to preach in the book, and I don't want to teach, and I don't want to use the books as a soapbox, but it's very hard to write a novel set in Zimbabwe and not be touched by what's happened and not be moved by it. It's probably the most serious of my books. If you have read some of my other novels, they're all mostly standalone novels. It's a sequel to an early one, African Sky, but it looks at the plight of Zimbabwe and Rhodesia through 3 families, 1 black African family and 2 white families, and a rhino. The plight of the rhino in Zimbabwe, and indeed all of Zimbabwe's wildlife, very much mirrors the situation of the country, a metaphor, if you will. Wildlife is hanging on, but only just. Wildlife is hanging on only with the support of extremely dedicated people, both locally and abroad. The people that I meet in my travels in Africa are the rangers, the guys that go out, the Zimbabwe National Parks guys, who go out with a pair of raggedy shorts and a t-shirt and a pair of sandals with an AK-47 looking for poachers, who put their lives literally on the line, who've seen friends killed and have killed in the defence of wildlife. The researchers, people like Matt and other people that I've met, people like John and Ange and the work that they've done, who give up their time for no reward to dedicate their lives to conserving animals. In the course of writing the book, I also met and interviewed people who run rhino breeding programs in Zimbabwe, people who give up their land, their time and their lives to try and protect the species from extinction. It's pretty heavy stuff. I'm a bit of a glass half full person, I must say, after 16 years in Africa. As much as I love the continent, it's incredible scenery, it's amazing wildlife, and it's fascinating characters. The good that I see is sometimes overshadowed by the exposure that I've had to the continent's problems. I don't try and shy away from the problems in the book. I don't try and become too goggle-eyed by the good stuff either. I try to report, or at least to write, in a fairly balanced way. I think the amazing thing about the wildlife is it is endangered in so many instances, but the incredible thing is it is still there, and it's there because of people like yourselves, and it's there because of people locally who do sometimes put their lives on the line and do dedicate themselves to preserving species. Painted Dogs are, by the way, in the next book, which is written and coming out in October next year. But Nicola and I were driving through Wangi National Park about 10 years ago in our old Land Rover. We stuck our head out the window of the Land Rover and saw these three-toed tracks on the ground. And I think they might be rhino tracks, fancying myself as a bit of a bushman. We pulled over and got our little field guide to the African mammals out and checked it. Thought, yes, this is a rhino. It's something you don't see every day. As I drove down the road, I could see the tracks speared off to the right and onto a little game trail back into the bush. And I thought, oh no, we've come so close and we've missed it. And as I pulled abreast of this game trail, I looked up there, and there, about 15 metres away, was a fully grown black rhino, about 1.5 tons of it. It looked at us. Now, this is an animal, of course, that has a reputation for being unpredictable, aggressive, quick to charge. But I thought, I'm safe, I'm in my truck. So I put its head down and it charged me. It came straight towards the Land Rover. Now, I've got an old Series 3 Land Rover, very similar to the one that Sid donated to the conservation project in South Toowoomba. Mine's a diesel. It's got a top speed of 70 kilometres an hour. It goes from 0 to 70 in 30 minutes. Fortunately, I was on a downhill slope, so I rammed it into gear and took off. And I planted the accelerator and managed to coax it up to 40 k's an hour. And I looked in the rearview mirror, and there was the rhino, right on my tail and gaining fast. It was galloping after us, down the road from Masuma Dam down towards Mandavu. Down dale, uphill, followed us. It was travelling at 40 k's an hour for 5 kilometres. I'm not joking. This thing was hell-bent on killing us. And of course, we're having a range of emotions. I'm thinking it's a black rhino. So we're driving along and I say to Nicola, it's a black rhino, let's take a photo. And she's going, drive, drive, drive. It's trying to kill us, you know. I've only seen these things about 7 times in the last 15 years. Drive faster, it's trying to get us. Anyway, I came to a hill up near Mandavu, and the old Land Rover started slowing down. I thought, this is it, I'm going to be dead now. This thing was right on the spare tyre on the back. Fortunately, I hooked around in a tight left-hand turn, nearly rolled the Land Rover, and the rhino lost interest. So I beetled on up to Cinematella Camp, where I saw a fellow that I know up there, one of the African Rangers, Oscar, who was there at the time. I said, Oscar, I've just been chased by a black rhino. It was trying to kill me. And he said, oh, that was Chiwari. I said, I didn't know it had a name. He says, no. I said, it's trying to get me. And he said, oh, it was hungry. And I said, well, to the best of my knowledge, they don't eat people. He said, no, let me explain. Chiwari, a little bit of a sad story. Chiwari was an orphan. Her mother had been killed by poachers, and she was from the Chiwari safari area originally. She'd been relocated from there to the Matusadona National Park, to Tashinga on the shores of Lake Kariba, where she and another number of other orphans had been raised to adulthood by National Parks rangers. And as Oscar explained to me, Chiwari would forever associate green Land Rovers with the National Park's food truck. So she was trying to get hold of me to get full of a handful of game pellets or something. I said, well, Oscar, that's fantastic, but I don't have any rhino food, and what if she caught me? And Oscar said to me, well, she's a naughty rhino. And I said, clearly. And I said, why is she naughty? And he said, well, you know, what Chiwari was doing was that she was leaving the national park, and like about 3 million other Zimbabweans, she had a habit of walking to Botswana, which is about 40 kilometres away as the crow flew from where we were. And I said, what happened then? Well, she leaves Zimbabwe, she walks to Botswana, and the Botswana Wildlife Authority guys would pick her up and bring her back in, data and pick her up and bring her back home to Zimbabwe. And I said, that's an amazing story. So I came back the following year, and I saw Oscar. I said, how's my friend Chiwari the rhino? And he said, she's gone. And I said, gone to Botswana? And he said, no, she's gone. We haven't seen her. I think she's gone for good. I see so much sadness sometimes when I travel, but I've never failed to be moved by the resilience of the human spirit and the way that people carry on. In the book African Dawn, I have looked at the tragedy that's occurred in Zimbabwe over the last 20 years or so, and longer, but what I've done is worked in the stories of real people who've suffered incredible adversity, people who've lost their land and their livelihoods, people who've joined the growing opposition movement for democratic change in Zimbabwe, and time after time, year after year, gone to the polls to peacefully cast their vote in the knowledge that they will probably be intimidated and possibly be beaten up and perhaps even killed. The fact that the Zimbabwean opposition has gone from strength to strength without a shot being fired, without anybody picking up arms or picking up a machete, is pretty inspirational and encouraging. I believe there is hope for that country, and I believe there's hope for the continent. I think the wildlife is a key to that, and particularly in Zimbabwe, I think if and when people do start returning to Zimbabwe in force, it'll be the wildlife that helps bring the country back up to speed again. Just to finish on a slightly more upbeat note, I ran into Nicholas Duncan back in June when I was over here in Perth doing some Library Week talks. And I said, Nicholas, have you heard about Chawari? And he said, yes, I have. And I said, isn't it a shame? He says, what do you mean? I said, well, I heard she's gone, that she'd been killed. And Nicholas said, well, she walked to Botswana, as she sometimes did, and the Botswanans got sick of taking her back to Zimbabwe. So they took her to a place called the Kama Rhino Sanctuary in the centre of Botswana, where they captive breed rhinos and conserve them, where she lives today and has recently had a baby. Thank you very much. And there are books for sale, and all profits are going to PDC, and I'll be happy to sign them after Matt's talk.